Okay, hi everyone, welcome. We're live. We're going to get started in just a minute here. I'm Julie Johnson-Roberts, co-founder and chief strategy officer of Lambent. Welcome to our latest Lambent webinar on strategic campus planning. While we give everyone a minute, I'll go through a few quick housekeeping items, and I can see people are trickling in now, which is great. If you're not familiar with GoToWebinar, you should see a red arrow on the top right of your screen. If you have a question, feel free to type it in that questions box, and we're going to make sure that we set aside the last 15 minutes or so here to answer questions from the attendees. We have an awesome group of folks registered and really excited to hear some of your questions after you hear from our panelists. If you've registered for today's webinar, you'll also get a follow-up note from Lambent telling you a little bit more about what we do, but that's not our focus today. We really are here for a great conversation with Eddie and Marc talking about flexibility in the future, how we plan our campuses. So we're going to dive in just 1 minute. I'm going to give folks just a few more seconds to jump on. Okay, I'm getting the green light. So welcome again. I'm Julie Johnson-Roberts, co-founder and chief strategy officer of Lambent, and welcome to our latest Lambent webinar. I'm going to start by introducing our two esteemed speakers, starting with Marc. Marc Fournier is a VP of Real Estate and Auxiliary Services at Georgetown University. Marc brings experience with private and public universities that are large and small, most recently both George Mason and Georgetown, and before that was a hotel real estate professional. Our second speaker is Eddie Wagoner, who joins us from JLL, where he's CIO of Digital JLL. Eddie is widely recognized as a thought leader in the area of modern workspaces and is credited with building one of JLL America's highest performing and most diverse teams. So welcome, Marc and Eddie. We're thrilled to have you here. So let's jump right in, starting with setting the table. Part of the reason we're here today is because 2020 really forced a huge change in how we all use and understand our spaces. It's about 3 years later. So Marc, let's go to you first. If you're stuck in an elevator with the provost tomorrow and they say, how has campus space planning changed in the last 2 years? What do you say?
Yeah, hello everybody. Great to be with you, and thanks for having me here today, Julie. I think, I would answer that with we're at a point of reflection. We've resumed some sense of normalcy as it relates to the core academic component, but we're still learning to adapt to this sort of hybrid, back of the office, new norm related to administrative functions. Who should be where, when, how often? I think we're struggling to find identity there. We're trying to assess and reassess space, the allocation of space, how it's used, and we're challenging ourselves with how to allocate that space in a flexible manner and really focus the space on areas of need. And I think we see it as an opportunity for the future to sort of constrain some areas and allow growth for other areas, because there still is that overwhelming challenge related to allocating space to the right folks at the right time.
Definitely a balancing act in some cases, right? How about for you, Eddie? JLL is on the ground at many large universities. What are you seeing? Are you seeing the same, balancing of needs?
So if I were in that same elevator with Marc and his provost and someone else, I would say, listen to everything that Marc just said, and not even just, campus, but all real estate. I think there's opportunities to learn across all of the asset types and take lessons that are learned and leverage data and use as proof points. In addition to what Marc said, one of the things that we're noticing is people are demanding a better experience. And so we're having to understand what that means. And it'll be interesting as we talk through with Marc to see how that maybe compares with what we're seeing in corporate or in retail and other places. But a lot of people that use the space are starting to tell us some things that they're expecting that maybe pre-pandemic, maybe they wouldn't have vocalized, maybe they wouldn't have known about. I think the other thing that we're starting to see is an increased focus on sustainability. We know that buildings have an outsized impact on the environment. I believe the UN says 44% of negative impact on our climate is produced by the built environment. So at JLL, we recognize we have an ethical responsibility to play our part in that. And I know a lot of our education's institutions are doing a lot of work in that area, a lot of scholastic work. And so there's big opportunities there. And then the last one is, real estate is not known historically as being the innovators of technology. We're not usually the first, but that's rapidly changing as people are demanding that we better leverage technology and that we better use the data that's currently available to us, but also how do we get more data that we need to understand the utilization, understand the need. So obviously I was on a long elevator ride for that, but there's a lot of focus and there's a lot of opportunity.
It's interesting, especially your last point about leveraging the data, understanding our environments, and we talk a lot about metrics, right? What do we measure? How do we measure it? But when we go and talk to our university customers and prospects, they tell us they know how their space is assigned. What they don't know is how it's actually being used or if it's being used. These priorities about measuring and using data are shifting. We're hearing that conversation a lot. What do you hear in that regard, Marc? Are you talking about data on your campus? How do you tie that into your annual project planning?
Yeah, I would answer that data is a challenge holistically. So not just related to space, but to many functions with the institution. The systems and processes that are built over time. And sometimes there's layers upon layers of databases and systems themselves. And those systems and processes don't always talk to each other. And, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody today about trying to find a way to analyze all the various databases, find one central source of record that we could go to in the case of an emergency, or like, look what just happened. We keep seeing in the news about safety and security on college campuses, right? Where do we go to find who's where, when, right? And how do we know that they're actually here? So, I would say that that's one big struggle from the data perspective. I think the other is related to privacy. I think there's an expectation that people keep where they are when they're there, is private and sacred and sacrosanct to them, especially in higher ed, probably a little bit different than the corporate environment, where those expectations, filter up through things like tenure and faculty governance and shared governance. So to your point, while we can identify space type and use, outside of the registrar's data related to classroom utilization, it is really, really hard to know who's in an office environment when, who's in a convening space environment when, even student spaces. There really is no way to capture the data related to the movement. We could do heat mapping and we could do sort of card readers and we could do some door, access reading, but holistic data that you can really rely on to make decisions about the future is really a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eddie, when JLL is working with campuses or even in corporations, how are you all bringing data into the conversation? What do you bring to the table to add to the narrative of what you're seeing around these campuses and other footprints?
Again, I'm going to start taking Marc to a lot of my meetings because everything he said, it's how do you use your existing data and understand that. But, there's also emerging technologies that will help us better understand utilization. We're starting to use a lot of sensors to capture that utilization. And one thing I find, and Marc alluded to this, he mentioned data privacy. But before we even get to that conversation, when we bring that up and say, we could use sensors to actually show you real utilization, before we can even get that out of our mouths, people, no, you're not tracking me. I'm like, well, wait. We let ourselves be tracked every day when we perceive that we're getting a personal benefit, whether it's, hey, Uber, I'm over here, or Instacart, deliver right here, or, think of all the ways, Amazon, all the ways that you will give your location to someone for a service benefit. And I think Marc's example of the real case in the news where you could deliver something everyone would want. I want you to know I'm in the building when I need you to come help me. I think telling people, look, here's how we'll use the data. Here's our privacy policy, be very transparent about it, and then follow everything ethically the way that we have it laid out. And I think if we could show people, look, here's the benefit you're going to receive, the institution will receive, I think we could actually do some better things around utilization and sustainability. But very much like Marc said, again, regardless of asset type, whether it's corporate America, higher education, people don't want to be tracked unless you tell them what you're going to do with their data and how you're going to use it to benefit them.
Yeah, that's right. This is a perfect example, again, going to where Mark started of, conflicting desires. We don't want to be tracked, but yet, from a campus planning perspective, we recognize the need for data because we recognize the need to better understand how our campuses are actually being utilized, which unfortunately hasn't always been trending upwards in the last few years. We certainly hear a lot about underutilized space in a commercial real estate, and increasingly that's a topic that comes up a lot in higher ed, particularly around spaces like administrative offices, which might be leveraging hybrid work increasingly. And that, ultimately that underuse has downstream impacts, everything from how much space we need, or do we need new spaces? Can we repurpose existing spaces? And then things like sustainability, Eddie, that you mentioned. Can we decrease our related energy usage if our buildings aren't being used the way that we hope that they are? So, as you walk around a campus today, Mark, what are you seeing? Are you seeing people acknowledge the ability to use space flexibly and dynamically, or is there still a perception that we don't have enough space, that we need more space?
Yeah, so I want to react to your prior comment and then try to answer that question. So I think, as Eddie noted, the costs associated with real estate will continue to escalate over time. And when you think about the interdependence of departments and people on a college campus or in an office building or whatever it might be, again, I try to boil this down to a group that's trying to help me answer this challenge related to the single source directory, right? Where's the point of record? And I said, think about the mailroom person, the person that has to deliver the mail on a consistent basis to an office. And everything is in so much flux at all times. Imagine how frustrating it must be to go and find the door locked or nobody there, or Mary Sue's now hybrid and she's never coming to work again except for maybe once or twice a month, or whatever it might be. How is that person going to continue to administer their function? Similarly, as it relates to custodial workers. Now, every office has a door and every door has a lock, and that poor person that has to work on the overnight shift to open up, 1,000 doors when there's really only 100 people there just to see if there's an apple core in the trash. The interdependence of that is, fascinating when you think about it, really trying to understand who's where, when. And then I think we mentioned the safety and security, and I think you mentioned it right just now, Julie, related to, building automation systems can only do so much. They don't really tell you who's where, when. Right? They can you can say, oh, well, we think people are going to be here from 8 to 5 or 8 to 8 or whatever it might be. So from a sustainability perspective and from an energy management perspective and the impact that you have on the world, how could you better utilize data to make good decisions, smart decisions about the folks that work for you, those services that you provide, and then, of course, the sustainable aspects of real estate in general. And then if you could remind me again, Julie, that you posed the question, since
I think you hit most of it, but segueing into with some of this underuse, are you still hearing people say,
yeah,
I need more space?
Yes, yeah.
Space,
So
right? What do you tell them? Yeah, we need more.
There's constant tension related to space. And I think people, COVID was hopefully a once in a lifetime experience, right? But it's really thrown folks for a loop. People are very used to having a space for their things. Whether they're there or not, it doesn't really matter all the time. It's really, where can I go and feel comfortable? I think the human truths, still remain. I want to feel like I belong to something. And if I have a space that's my own, then I, out of default, belong. And we're going to be ever challenged with trying to adapt to the new norm. And I think it will take time. I don't know, Eddie. I would imagine in the corporate environment, it's a little easier. Probably similar constructs, but you do, where you don't in higher ed, have the thou shalt. You can require and do a mandate. It may be a little bit easier than in higher education, but I do wonder if you think those constructs are the same related to people and how they feel like they belong and are understood.
I would actually love to play that comment in a corporate webinar and watch the chat explode with people. You know, there was a time when corporately the chief executive could say "thou shalt," and people often would get in line. They might complain, you know, behind the scenes. And you mentioned COVID once in a lifetime. That changed things. You know, companies that resisted remote work were thrust into 100% remote work. People that never had flexibility suddenly had to have flexibility to exist and to work during the pandemic. And so I think things are even changing, you know, again, regardless of asset type. It's interesting as you were talking, it struck me. Organizations, institutions all say we've got too much space. And I think most of us would say, yes, organization, institution, you do have too much space, but I need more space. And it's like what you said, you know, I'm used to coming in and putting my things down. I need a place to do heads down work. I need a place to, hey, Julie wants to have a quick little like one-on-one meeting unscheduled. Where's a drop-in room for that? Here comes Mark. Let's, you know, move over here and do a little chat. Now I've got a big meeting. You know, it's about that activity based. When I come in to do something, or depending on what I do, I need that type of space when I need that space. And I think that's the evolution that we're seeing in corporate workplace, and a lot of what I'm seeing and hearing from higher educational institutions is they start looking at, especially in administrative space, how do we adapt for remote in the future of work, and even in those institutions that are starting to adapt to some of the online learning in along with their in-person learning. How do they adapt the spaces for that, but then also have the right types of space for those different variables? So I still think in light of all this, it's still one of the most exciting times to be in real estate, because the utilization problem didn't start with COVID. It's just people actually had to acknowledge it coming out of COVID. And so we're dealing with a problem that we've had for a very, very long time. I think it's just people are agreeing with it more, recognizing there's a problem. The next step is to get people to agree on some of the solutions that we might propose.
Yeah, and I think just a quick reaction, Julie. So my explanation of people in space really correlates to the office component of the academic environment, right? The university environment. I'd be reluctant or remiss to not state that the academic core is a totally different animal, right? It's constantly growing. It's constantly evolving. There's never ever ending pressure on research and creating research and giving that out to the world. Programs are continuing to grow while others may lay fallow. What I've seen in my experience in higher education, we don't always do a great job with identifying those things that are declining and sunsetting them. They kind of stay in perpetuity while other things grow, and this creates this pressure on space. My hypothesis, my premise is, after doing space studies in two, you know, similar but different universities, both R1 and one big public and one, you know, modest private size-wise, is that the environment is comprised of almost 45% office space. And when you boil down the space to its smaller components, one of the smaller components is actually classroom and classroom-related functions, somewhere in the 15 to 20% range. So when you think about, what I think about is the problem that we need to solve is, how do we constrain the office environment, take advantage of COVID compression, really think strategically about this hybrid work environment, who should be here when, create policy and standard and grow into that, and try to give back to the core of the institution that underutilized office space, or, you know, prove that there's underutilization there and give that back to the core so the core can fulfill its mission.
That's perfect. And it actually brings us back a bit to where we started, right? This is where the data, the metrics that matter are so important. We were talking to a university recently where they're building a new business school. In order to do that, they're tearing down 3 old buildings. Now, those buildings are not the heaviest used buildings on campus, right? They're already a little bit older. Probably some of their infrastructure is older as well. But the second you say, I'm taking some buildings offline, people say, that's where my stuff is. That's where my study area is, or my offices are. And we're really working with them to measure what's actually happening in their space so that they know what they really need to reallocate. So I think to your point, Mark, what do you need to reallocate? Where do those other spaces exist on your campus? And the data is so important to doing that, and it's really not pervasive in most campuses yet to be able to measure at that level of how you're reallocating and repurposing things around. So it's pretty exciting stuff. The other thing that's come up quite a bit, we have a saying internally, plan for peak. To Eddie's point, I want to have a desk when I want to have a desk. I want to have an office when I want to have an office. Space is emotional. It can also be a bit political. It can be a prestige factor. As we talk to different people, one of the phrases that comes out of it is space hoarding. And we recently did a survey, over 250 space planners, and 80% of our campus space planners said that they've solved space disputes. Mark, do you see that? If you can talk about it.
Well, let me do the best I can.
Okay.
So, hoarding is relative, right? I think one person's thought about somebody else hoarding space is relative to them in their own environment. I will say that, in my hopefully unbiased opinion, I wasn't born and bred in higher ed. What I see is there are duplications of space, right? People have multiple offices, and the hoarding may not necessarily be hoarding in the intentional sense of wanting more space. It may be that people are very specific about the space they desire to be in, and therefore they create ways to hoard space, to be in the space that's important to them. I think the example I'll use is, we look, even when we have data that shows where people are and when, we don't necessarily know the why. And when we start to ask ourselves the questions about why would that be? And we start to look at things like facility condition assessments, right? How long ago was the space modified? Does it have the technology really to perform the function for whomever it is that's within the space? How far is it? How close is it? How far is it away from somebody in their office? How far is it away from the parking lot? I don't know. How close is it to the nearest coffee area? They're all different motivators for all different types of people. So it's more complicated than just data related to where people are at any moment in time. It's really, how do we look at it at an enterprise level and make smart decisions about why people are in the space and why there's this necessity to have more space, when maybe the start of the answer is we need to reconfigure spaces. We need to move people's offices to spaces that make more sense for that office to be located in the like.
Eddie, you have any thoughts on that one?
I love what Mark just said. I know that this desk or this office is closest to this person I talk to a lot, or I know where the coffee maker is from here, or it's all these things that I know for certain. And if you think about people, when we go to work, we've got so many challenges, and especially in today's environment, there's so many unknowns. And when you go to maybe an open environment or hoteling, you're adding even more unknowns. Where's my desk going to be today? How far is it from the front door? How far is it from the people I need to work with? Is it in a hot side of the building or the cold side of the, it's just all of these unknowns. And so I understand why people want to walk in to an incredibly busy, demanding day where they want to deliver for the students, the institution, the faculty and staff. They just want something that they know for certain. This is my desk, this is my place. I think we can respect that, though, with technology. I mentioned delivering a better experience, and it's everything through like wayfinding systems, or even using the data to say today, and again, some people are going to go, wait, data privacy, but just think for a minute. What if we could use your calendar to figure out the people you were meeting with and actually help you be closer together in the space or closer to the meeting rooms? And again, the data's there, the technology's there. It's just us integrating and putting the parts together. And so I think that's, again, we have to talk to people. We have to explain the opportunities. We have to get their buy-in, and they have to go on the journey with us. But I think there's a lot of opportunities in better communicating with people what we're trying to do and getting them to buy in, to go on that journey with us, than just, do the force. We've got to cut space. And I think just in closing on that part, Mark talked about using the money that's saved in that area to give back to the core purpose of the institution. I mean, that's a real reason why people should want to engage in that, focus on the mission. And I think even in, corporate America, if I can spend less here and make it more efficient, then we can do other things with that money in other places. And I think, that resonates with people when you explain to them the why.
Absolutely. And that spirit of partnership, the why, generally brings people in. It creates a more supportive narrative and dialogue instead of people feeling like something was taken away from them, at least from what we've heard.
And by the way, you have to be open for a lot of people to have a lot of opinions, but out of some of those opinions are going to come some incredible ideas that we haven't thought about because, Mark and I aren't the daily users of the space. We're the ones that are often delivering it. And that's what's so important, is to get into the mind of the people that are actually using it and understand what they need.
So that was actually a brilliant segue to my final structured question before we start wrapping up and going to Q&A, which is that sometimes when you're in these unusual times in the market, times of great challenge, you could actually see a ton of innovation. So I wanted to ask you both, what's some innovation that you're seeing around your campuses that you're most excited about, things that you've seen in the last year, maybe that are coming soon?
Yeah, I think I'd land on the technology and the technological improvements that were forced upon us to go to an all online setting for the academic component. I mean, we literally evacuated the campus back in March of 2020 and immediately had to perform, online classes. So while some were very prepared for that, they were still an opportunity to improve in a big way. I think, right now, again, policy related to hybrid and the who and the when and the where and sort of setting expectations is something that's in flux. It may not be a technological improvement, but I think it's an improvement that's well needed. And, at least, I'll say in higher education, now that may offend some people. And I think that we're starting to see, and I'd be very interested, Eddie, in your take on this, when we think about commercial real estate and highly amenitized space and that drawing people back into the office environment. In here, there's people that need to be here and they're going to be here because they're front facing and they're student facing and they're going to have to be on campus because everything is in person related to that function. The others that are working in a hybrid environment or a remote environment, I don't think we've quite figured out how to adapt to that person's need. So I think you said it eloquently with, identifying what it is that you need in a space. We have all these things, hoteling and hot desking and shared offices, and these are all like, what? I don't even know what that means and how am I going to do it? And when you go and you sit in a space that's now been developed as a hoteling office or, hot desk or whatever it might be, I'm finding that everybody's a little bit different, but there are core things that everybody expects. Right? So how do you fit out the office to make it comfortable so that when people come, they're not thinking, oh my God, I didn't bring my iPod charger and I don't have a dongle to plug the thing in and where's the plug and the light and I need a fan because I'm always hot or whatever it might be and I got to have 2 screens and, et cetera, et cetera. How can we be really thoughtful about that work environment to make it compelling to come back and easy and be there when I need to be there and be comfortable at home? And then again, how do we support a remote workforce? I don't think we've ever had to really do that before. So are we going to give them money to fit out their office at home? Or are we going to provide a stipend? Or are we going to let them take things home? These are all struggles and challenges that we're going to have to work through. But I expect that those improvements are going to come over time, and I'm excited to see them come because to be honest with you, I love hybrid. I would have, if you went back 10 years ago and somebody said, oh, half your workforce is going to be hybrid, I'd say, hell no, they're not going to. How am I going to know they're working? But when you hire good people and you trust your people and, you create a good environment for them, they work hard. And actually, I find that I'm working harder in a hybrid environment than I was maybe when I was always here because, I don't have to drive an hour to work each way. So my guess is that that's, that carries along many industries and many problems.
I know we didn't script this conversation, But if I were going to, I couldn't script what Marc said any more perfectly, I don't think. As he was talking, I was reminded that, we're focused on higher education and the institutions and the campus, but those campuses, those universities, they're actually part of a much bigger ecosystem. They have a huge impact on the cities and towns and areas around them. And so as we think about the impact and we think about the space utilization, and this is something in our public institutions group, which has a huge practice there, is helping higher institutions think about it. How do you take advantage of the opportunities around you, whether it's commercial office space or co-working space? It's Marc, talked about as people start looking for hybrid, and do you give a stipend? How do you help them? Work is wherever I am right now. And as we watch things evolve, your competition won't just be other people in higher education. It's going to be everybody in that big ecosystem that I mentioned before. So if corporate America gets more flexible or more opportunity, they'll start drawing from some of the higher education workers potentially that are like, hey, I can go do an accounting job for a corporation versus for the higher institution. I get more flexibility or a better experience. Or conversely, if higher education leads the way because of the research they have and because of the mindset about trying new things and learning, they could potentially draw some of the top talent away from corporate America toward their mission. So I think there's a lot of opportunity as we focus on what we're all doing in our institutions to also think more holistically. We've got some research that says that in order to meet the demands of hybrid, companies and organizations are recognizing they must partner with others to get that strategic input. And then Marc made the point about technology, so that saves me from having to make it. But I will tell you, during COVID, our venture fund has invested in over 40 emerging prop techs. We're tracking a little over 12,000. Think about that. That's a staggering number if everyone on this call had to keep track of those. But of those 40, there's just in those 40 that we're working with, there's huge opportunities to drive efficiencies, to drive better utilization, to deliver a better experience. And so I know this is a very short webinar, but it ought to be the start of a conversation amongst all of us, amongst the attendees, about what's the right solution for them, and then what's your right strategic plan to go about implementing that.
It's the perfect note to end on. Innovation, forward-looking, and where do we go from here? So while I'm sure everyone is typing their questions into the chat, one quick final thought for Marc and Eddie. If you could call your top prediction for 2023 or goal, what are we going to be talking about next year?
Yeah, I'm intrigued. I think you mentioned a university that's actually decommissioning buildings. I saw something about the University of Missouri decommissioning 12 buildings to take advantage of what they perceive as this opportunity related to hybrid work and remote work. So I imagine that more of that will occur. There's going to be a necessity to be really smart about future capital expenditures as the real estate environment is getting tougher and tougher and tougher. Capital markets are tightening, cost to borrow is escalating, and commodities are still out of control, right? So we're going to have to be really, really smart about what we spend money on, and really, really smart about the existing assets we have. And decommissioning may be a good strategy. I think labor costs are going to continue to escalate. Certainly costs of leasing real estate may have a dip in the short term because of some economic pressure, but not in every market. Some markets are coming back strong. I was in New York this past weekend. It was out of control there. So, compressing leased assets into core assets, I think, at least for Georgetown, will be something that we continue to do. And I think we're going to figure out this hybrid remote work environment. We're going to figure out a way to make it easy on our people. We're going to provide some structure and some policy related to that. And I think we'll continue to evolve in the space governance and assessment process.
I think we'll be talking about everything that Marc mentioned, and I gave predictions about what we'd be talking about in 2022, and we are, but we're also talking about a lot of things that just popped out of seemingly nowhere on all of us, and it seems like every day there's something new. I think there's going to be more of that going into 2023 2023 and beyond. I think Mark's absolutely right. Hybrid is here to stay. Every research we do, every report we receive says pretty much the same thing. You know, people have more of a focus on their health than they've ever had before. They want more flexibility. They want more experience. So I actually think keyword's going to be agility. How do we, real estate, move faster than we ever have before with assets that can't move as fast? You know, you've got longer term leases or construction projects or capital. You know, those things don't move quickly. So how do we use technology and data to enable some of that agility, enable real estate to keep up with the speed of education, with the speed of business, with the speed of the demand of the people that are actually using our space, whether it's students, staff, faculty, or visitors to the campus?
Fabulous. I think we have a question that takes me right back to where we started. What can I do to convince my chancellor or my big team that's looking at my annual space planning reports that we need to try new things? So now we're all in the elevator and we need some budget and we want to do something different. Those are two concepts that I think are challenging. What do we say? Mark, you're in the elevator. What would you do?
Yeah. I think, you know, change is hard regardless. It always has been, and it's specifically hard in higher education. So I feel for whoever this is. Challenge with the same thing here. Space governance is not something that we're rigorous about. An institution that's been around for almost 300 years is pretty set in their ways. And our strategy for that is to break things down in their smallest components. Every opportunity that we have when we develop new space is to set some standard. So start small, right? Try beta testing. In the example that I'm talking about, hybrid, you know, spaces on campus, this hoteling construct, through our space analysis, which I'm sure you do, you know, very well, we've identified spaces that are really underutilized, actually sometimes abandoned, because for whatever reason there was no money, there was no capital money to reconfigure the space, somebody moved out of a space and nobody backfilled, whatever it might be. Look for those spaces that are low-hanging fruit. Try to find some extra capital to put hoteling, hot desking, whatever. Leverage existing technology like Google Calendar and the like to have bookable rooms so people can block out spaces and start incrementally. You know, in my experience, it takes, you know, it's like being a farmer, right? You have to plant the seed and you got to keep watering it, and sometimes it doesn't take and you got to plant another seed and you just keep going. But if you're sound in your construct, if you really have a good idea, be passionate about it and try to find a way to do it on a very, very small scale and prove it conceptually.
Baby steps for buy-in, and then grow from there. Eddie, what would you add?
You know, I like the storytelling aspect. And what I mean by that is if you think about the people who influence space and benefit from it, it's a multitude of groups in our institutions and in our organizations. And so making sure that we are, you know, in corporate America, it's what does HR think about talent retention? What does the business think about delivery of goods and services? Is IT at the table helping us with digital? You know, do we have real estate? What about resilience of operations? And I think when you start bringing all of those factors in, you start realizing at the very center of all that, it's the user. It's the person that's not really represented in the room. And when you start getting inside the mind of that person, then I think it's an easier conversation with the chancellor or the CFO or the CEO or whatever organization you may be in. It's not necessarily saying I need more money. It's saying if we want to retain our competitive position 3 years, 5 years, here are the things others are doing that will put us at a disadvantage. And then you're going to make some prioritization. And I think that leads to, you know, if you're going to start prioritizing, you need a strategic roadmap. And from the technology and data side, I mentioned 12,000 prop tech. Where do you start? And even if you think you've got the right ones, which ones do you implement first so that you get the right integration opportunities? And so they always say, you know, design with the end in mind. Get a digital strategic roadmap, agree on that, get your chancellor to agree, okay, this is the priority one, and then continually go back and revisit, make that roadmap live and breathe. And I think that keeps everyone on the same page. I'm not going to say it's going to make the conversations easier, but at least people start talking the same language and start having a more common understanding.
Absolutely. We have time for just one more question, and I figure we'll end on a zinger that came in.
Oh, you, Mark.
Oh boy.
Considering how fast everything changed in the last 2 to 3 years, how far ahead can universities reasonably predict space needs? Can you still really set a 10, 20, 30-year plan for space?
Yeah, I think you have to have, you just said it, Eddie, you have to have some roadmap. The fundamentals are still the same, right? So I think I mentioned this. We know that there are programs that are declining, and we know that there are programs that are increasing, right? We know that hybrid is likely here to stay. So there are fundamentals there that we can layer into a strategic plan. All strategic plans change over time, right? This is not new. I don't expect that we're going to have another, COVID type event. My God, I hope not in my lifetime. So, some things related to strategic planning will resume some sense of normalcy. Focus on the fundamentals, doing right things right. Maslow's hierarchy of need is not going to change. People are going to need food, water, shelter, services, and the like. And technology is going to be something that's continue to evolve. Yeah, I think that's my basic answer there.
I'm looking at a website real quick to make sure I say this right. And I know this was not scripted, but I'm gonna, JLL just released its brand new global tagline the other day, see a brighter way. And the reason I bring that up is, even in corporate America, people will say, can you really predict that out? And we're saying, we always start with the limiting language about can't. We need to start seeing a brighter way. And actually in that tagline in the video they put out, we actually are making this bold statement that we see a day where we can predict the transaction before it comes on the market. So I can't tell you how we're going to do that yet, but it's like a big goal to use technology and data to better predict. And so, yes, I can't tell you how we'll do it right now, but I think we're going to get better. And maybe not 20, 30 years out, but if we could start predicting better a year, 3 years, 5 years, we'll get there. And I think that's why the use of technology and data, I think understanding our current utilization and what people are looking for so that we can predict our better utilization and create the better spaces that drive that. I think that's the key to our future. And I think that will create the vibrant campuses that everyone wants to be on, because it supports the mission, it supports learning, it contributes back to the local community.
What a great note to look on. I certainly believe there's a bright way forward for our campuses, for understanding behavior, for making people feel like they have spaces that work for them. And I'm really grateful for the conversation today. So thank you to Marc and Eddie for joining me. Thank you to everyone who attended today for your great questions. We hope we'll have more conversations like this one, and I'm sure we could have gone on another hour, but we'll leave it there. And I really appreciate everyone joining us today. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.